Well, Donald Trump is making no exceptions to his 25% tariffs on global steel and aluminium imports to the U.S., even saying he'll double the tariff on Canada to 50%. Now that the tariffs are in effect, exporters, including Australia, are looking for solutions and perhaps some new buyers that are closer to home. Dr Weihuan Zhou is the co-director of the China International Business and Economic Law Centre at the University of New South Wales, and he joins me now from Sydney. Good to have you with us on the program. Now, the US is a big importer of both steel and aluminium, so what will be the impacts of higher prices on the US economy, and will US firms still be buying at higher costs?
Oh, it's great to join you. The economic impacts on the US consumers, including the importers of steel and aluminum inputs for production in the United States, will be significant because of the global effects of the tariff, meaning that the tariff is imposed on all imports around the world, without any exception at the moment. So which means that there will be a 25% increase in the price of steel and aluminum products covered by the tariff into the United States. That will be the increased price for consumers and the companies using inputs, steel and aluminum inputs for production. The exact impact is unknown at the moment, and also subject to uncertainty that Trump may actually create exceptions. So we will have to see what kind of exceptions he might create, as well as how much the U.S. companies, domestic companies, may actually produce steel and aluminum products to fill the market.
Yes, so on that point, does the U.S. and the companies there have enough steel and aluminium for its domestic market?
It is still a empirical question that we do not have sufficient data at the moment. But the data we have from at least past year is that U.S. steel imported a significant portion of domestic demand for steel and aluminum imports products, and including Canada as the top exporter to the United States. Australia only exported a small portion as part of Australia's entire exports. Again, it is really hard to tell, but I think Mr. Trump is looking at the longer term effects of making America great again. Basically, that have the first American policy that goes into part of the manufacturing industries that he sees is in national interests.
Yes, we'll see how that goes in the future. But coming back home, the federal government, why is it up in arms about the steel and aluminium exports? Because it only accounts for only 0.2% of Australia's total exports.
Because that we have a very protected steel industry, in my view, in Australia. And the fact of the matter is that our steel industry, aluminum industry in Australia, has long been protected by anti-dumping tariffs, which meaning that Australian government imposes tariffs on imports. And those imported steel and aluminum products from major exporters, including South Korea, Japan, China, Taiwan, and some other countries. So the question is, if we have a protected industry and the industry's production exceeds what the Australian market can actually consume, then perhaps more exports will be needed going into the future. And these exports will be affected by the 25% tariff.
Yes, and so can Australia, for instance, find other markets for those exports?
Australia does export steel and aluminum products into other markets, including Asia-Pacific countries. So the question is whether these countries would allow market access for Australian steel and aluminum imports into these markets, given the fact that I just mentioned that Australia imposes anti-dumping duties on a range of steel and aluminum products from these markets, including, for example, South Korea, Japan. And also because of the Trump tariff, the exports of steel and aluminum products from those markets to the United States will also be affected, which means that they will have more for domestic consumption, right? So if there are more for domestic consumption, then there will be less room for Australian exports to get into this market.
Yes, of course.
Meaning,
yeah, so Australia is not the biggest, exporter of steel and aluminium. In our region, we're looking at South Korea, Vietnam, China, Japan. What do you think those countries will be looking to as major exporters of those metals?
they will definitely try to find alternative markets for exportation. And it becomes tricky and interesting because we don't really know how they will do that. Because, as I said, the 25% tariff applies to everybody, and everybody, including the major producers and exporters, will have more for domestic consumption. And then one way is to export the overproduced, if you like, steel and aluminum products into other markets. But the fact is that these markets also have overproduced steel and aluminum products.
Yes.
So whether we're gonna see increased protection in these markets against each other is also something interesting to watch.
And I want to get your thoughts on China because, like you said, they are also a big exporter. It's also a huge economy that is still growing, but the economic growth is somewhat sluggish. Can China depend on its own domestic demand to perhaps buy more steel and aluminium within its borders?
I think the short answer is no, because China has been the country that has been criticized for many years, have a significant problem over capacity, exporting the overproduced steel and aluminum products into the other markets. And therefore, China's steel and aluminum products in those markets, including in Australia, have been subject to high anti-dumping duties and anti-subsidy duties for many years. And we still have in Australia, for example, existing anti-dumping duties against Chinese steel and aluminum products. And there are still also ongoing investigations against Chinese products imported into Australia. So China does not really have the capacity to absorb more steel and aluminum products from overseas unless those products have a different quality and that actually meets the domestic demand.
Okay, Dr. Weihuan Zhou, really good to get your expertise on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.